They docked 15 minutes from my paycheck because I clocked in 60 seconds late. So I sat still for 15 minutes. Didn't lift a finger. The silence in that maintenance lounge was louder than Scott Tremblay's authority. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just making a point, I was opening a door for the rest of my team to walk through. I'm Valerie Knox. I'm 51 years old, and I've been a heavy machinery technician at an industrial supply yard just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma for the last 14 years. I've worked through ice storms, double shifts, and 2 ownership changes, always on time, always reliable. You'd think that kind of track record might buy you a little grace. But corporate doesn't think in decades anymore, especially not when someone like Scott Tremblay gets promoted. Scott came from another division down in Houston, shuffled over to us last February after some HR incident that never made it past whispers. From day one, he carried himself like a man sent to break a wild horse. He thought discipline was leadership and eye contact was a challenge. It didn't take long for me to land on his radar. Maybe it was when I pushed back on a faulty lockout-tag-out procedure during a safety briefing. Scott didn't argue. He smiled, nodded like I was cute for caring, then ignored me for the next 5 days. And the following Monday, he made his first power move. All employees must be clocked in by exactly 7:00 a.m. He announced, pacing like a preacher. Clocking in at 7:00 is considered late. Any delay will result in a 15-minute pay deduction. No exceptions. We stared at him. Surely he was kidding. Nobody enforces policy like that. Scott did. The very next morning, I was on site at 6:47 as usual. But while pulling on my gloves, I realized I'd left my badge in my truck. I hustled back across the gravel lot, grabbed it, and clocked in at 7:01. Scott was already standing there, arms folded, like he'd been waiting to pounce. 7:01, he muttered, without looking up. That's a dock? I stared at him. You're joking, right? Rules are rules. Valerie? He replied. Deadpan. Something inside me didn't break. It shifted. Not hot, not loud, just done. Then I'll start work at 7:15, I said calmly and walked straight to the lounge. Scott followed confused. You're on the clock. I looked him square in the eye. No, you docked me. I don't work for free. And just like that, the quiet resistance began. Then I'll start working at 7:15, I said evenly. I walked to the back of the maintenance lounge, set my gloves on the bench, and sat down. Calm, silent. Not out of spite, but out of principle. Scott Tremblay followed me like a bloodhound. You're on the clock, he barked from the doorway. I looked up without blinking. No, I said plainly. You docked me. I don't work for free. He stared at me like I'd just broken some sacred oath. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't being defiant. I was following his rules to the letter, and he hated that. The room around us went completely still. You could hear the old vending machine humming in the corner, the slow clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. No one said anything, but every eye was watching. Scott stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to cave. I didn't. I sat with my back straight, hands folded, and eyes level. No sarcasm, no rebellion, just quiet certainty. After a long pause, he scoffed and turned on his heel, storming out without a word. I stayed seated until the clock hit 7:15. Then, as if nothing happened, I stood up, picked up my wrench, and got to work. No yelling, no spectacle, just a clock. His clock, but my silence. That echoed louder than any shouting match. By lunch, the story had already made its way around the warehouse. A few people nodded my way. One guy clapped once, when Scott wasn't looking. I hadn't started a movement, but I'd started something. All I did was sit down. And yet, that act, so small, so measured, felt bigger than anything I'd done in years. That night, I sat in my truck for 10 full minutes before going inside. I didn't cry from fear. I cried from exhaustion. Physical, mental, emotional. 14 years of never being late, always stepping up, always doing more than my job description asked. And it took just 1 minute for my worth to be questioned. 60 seconds, and suddenly I was dispensable. Forget the overtime, the emergency weekends, the younger techs I'd mentored. To Scott, I was just another number. The next morning, I pulled into the lot at 6:53, and I waited. At 7:02, Deshaun, one of the new hires, pulled up next to me. He looked confused. "You not going in?" he asked. I gave a faint smile. "I'll start at 7:15. I was late." He blinked. "You're serious I don't work for free?" I said softly. "Neither should you." He paused, then leaned back in his seat. And just like that, I wasn't alone. Then Deshaun reached over, turned the key in the ignition, and flipped on the radio. We both sat there in silence, waiting for 7:15 to arrive. That was the moment everything changed. Over the next few days, I wasn't the only one sitting still. More and more folks in the yard caught on. If the company was only paying from 7:15, then that's when the work would start. No more jumping in early. No more giving away time for free. There were no slogans, no picket signs, just precision. We weren't slacking. We weren't angry. We were exact. And that quiet precision. It drove Scott Tremblay absolutely out of his mind. Each morning he paced like a watchdog, clutching that clipboard like it was a life preserver. He stared out from the break room window at the line of trucks in the lot, engines off, workers inside calmly waiting. His fingers tapped against the window pane like a countdown timer ticking away his control. One morning, he caught me near the lockers. "You think you're clever, Knox?" He hissed, voice low and tight. I met his gaze. "No, Scott. I think I'm done being used. You're poisoning the team." "No," I replied, slow and firm. "I'm reminding them they're people, not machines." For a moment, something shifted in his eyes. Guilt, fear. It passed quickly. He didn't respond, just turned and walked off. But the damage was done. And not to us, to him. The very rules Scott had designed to assert control had sparked a quiet revolution. You could feel it in the air. There were no more footsteps pounding the floor at 6:59, no last-minute rushes to the clock-in station. Just quiet, collective patience. From his perch in the break room each morning, Scott watched us. Like a general, surveying a battlefield he no longer commanded. Clipboard, tense jaw, eyes that couldn't hide the truth. He'd lost control, and the ripple spread fast. By the end of the first week, even second shift had caught wind of what was happening. They began doing the same tracking hours, logging everything, holding managers accountable. If someone stayed late, they made sure it was documented and approved. No more doing the company a favor. No more unpaid extras. People stopped saying yes to every barked order. They didn't argue. They just moved slower, asked for clarity, asked to see it in writing. If Valerie's quiet strength inspired you, don't miss what happens next. There's more to this story. More challenges, more truths uncovered, and the real fight to reclaim respect at work. Subscribing means you'll be the first to hear every twist and turn, every moment of courage and change. Join this community where voices once silenced find power. Hit that subscribe button gently, because sometimes the smallest click sparks the biggest movement. Stay with us and let's walk this journey together. Your next story of resilience is just around the corner. They weren't disrespectful. They were deliberate. Scott had tried to instill fear. Instead, he taught us boundaries. And the line? It had been drawn. It felt like watching a sleeping giant stir to life. And Scott? He unraveled. He called emergency meetings with no agenda. His voice, once smug and performative, now cracked with irritation. The emails came next. Long, bloated walls of text packed with HR lingo and policy jargon. He was trying to wrestle back control, but it was already slipping through his fingers. One morning, he exploded during our stand-up huddle. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, voice rising. "You think you're clever, wasting time dragging down morale. This isn't how a team operates." No one answered. We stood still, eyes down, lips tight. It wasn't fear anymore. It was disgust. I felt it burning in my chest, not panic, but that deep, slow anger you get when someone mistakes bullying for leadership. That afternoon, I walked into HR, not to file a formal complaint, just to leave a mark, a record. The woman behind the desk looked up when I gave my name. Her expression softened, like she'd been expecting me. That should have been reassuring, but it only twisted my gut tighter. I returned to the floor and tried to focus, tightening bolts, checking gauges, but something lingered. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That evening, Deshaun walked out with me to the parking lot. "He's been eyeing you hard," he said under his breath. I let out a low laugh. "Let him. I'm not breaking the rules." "No," he said, "but you broke his illusion. That's worse." Maybe he was right. The next morning, Scott stormed into the building, slammed his office door, and didn't come out until after lunch. It was the quietest the place had felt in weeks. People moved with ease. Smiles crept back. For a few hours, it felt normal. But peace doesn't last when power feels threatened. By Friday, Scott rolled out his next move: performance audits. He began dragging folks into his office one by one, questioning every bathroom break, every moment someone stood still waiting for machinery or double-checked a safety protocol. It was tactical and petty. And the first name he called mine. "Your productivity's down 11% this month," he said, voice slick with fake concern. "Care to explain?" I nearly laughed. "You docked my time. I'm giving exactly what you pay for." His lips curled. "Your attitude's starting to concern me more than your punctuality." How original. I kept my voice even. "If this is a formal disciplinary meeting, I'd like HR present." He paused long enough to taste the shift. Then he waved his hand. "Fine, you're excused." But I knew better. This wasn't over. It was escalation. Excused. He might as well have sent me to the principal's office. I walked out of that room feeling a strange mix of fire and clarity in my chest. Scott wasn't done. That much was obvious. He was gunning for me now, and a part of me, yes, was nervous. But a bigger part of me, the part that had spent years swallowing every slight, every brush off, every promotion handed to someone I trained, that part was done being afraid. Scott didn't know I'd been ready for this moment since the day I was told to be a team player, when a male coworker showed up late 3 times in 1 week, and I was expected to stay late to cover unpaid. Since the day my raise got lost in the budget, but a new supervisor somehow showed up with a company car and a signing bonus. He had drawn the line. And now I was on the other side of it. That Monday, the air in the yard felt charged, not with fear, but with something sharper: resolve. The usual morning hustle had shifted. Movements were tighter, more intentional. People weren't slacking. They were focused. The silence that used to be filled with resignation was now filled with awareness. I wasn't the only one Scott had pulled into that office for a so-called performance review. By Friday, at least 6 others had been targeted. All long-timers, all respected, all carefully documented as problems now. But what Scott hadn't planned on was that he was no longer the only one keeping records. HR started receiving a sudden influx of emails. Quiet ones, short, polite, but very specific. No one was yelling. No one had to, because when enough people whisper the truth, it becomes impossible to ignore. By Wednesday morning, HR sent out a company-wide email reminding employees of their rights concerning retaliation and hostile work environments. It was vague, but we all knew exactly what it meant. That same morning, I saw something new. Deshaun was keeping a little black notebook. He wasn't the type, but there it was poking out of his back pocket. He caught me glancing and gave a small smile. "Paper trail," he said, "just in case." That simple gesture hit me like a truck. What kind of workplace makes good people feel they need evidence to survive? Still, Scott didn't ease off. If anything, he doubled down. He started shadowing the crew, walking the floor like a ghost in a safety vest. He hovered, nitpicked, asked loaded questions to bait someone into slipping up. But no one took the bait. We'd seen behind the curtain, and there was no going back. And still, no one cracked. One of the forklift operators, Rosa, was asked why she took a bathroom break at 9:32 instead of waiting until the scheduled 10:00. She looked Scott Tremblay dead in the eye and said, "Bladders don't follow timetables, Scott." I nearly choked on my coffee. It was too perfect, too bold, and exactly what we needed. That afternoon, things escalated. Scott called an emergency team meeting in the break room. He stood stiff as a broomstick, arms folded like a scolding schoolteacher. His voice was clipped sharp, the kind of tone meant to sound in control, but only revealed how rattled he really was. "Let's be clear," he said, scanning the room. "This culture of passive resistance ends now. If you're on this team, you show up, you follow instructions, and you comply. No delay, no excuses." His eyes landed squarely on me. I didn't blink. And right then, like the universe had perfect comedic timing, someone from HR stepped through the doorway mid-sentence. Her name was Dana. I'd spoken with her earlier that week. She smiled calmly and said, "Sorry to interrupt. Just here to observe today's team interaction. The timing, the tension, the look on Scott's face. I could have written a ballad about it." He stumbled over his next words, then abruptly ended the meeting 5 minutes early. People walked out of that break room like they had new lungs. The tension that had clung to our shoulders for weeks was suddenly lighter. Scott, the man who tried to command loyalty through fear, was now the one under the microscope. Every instruction, every glance, every little burst of temper was being noticed. And timed. But I knew he wasn't finished. Men like Scott don't step down, they strike back. I didn't know when it would happen, but I could feel it building. His silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. And on Friday morning it came. Carla from HR greeted me with a polite smile and led me into her office. Her face was composed, but there was something in her eyes and unease, maybe even regret, that made my stomach sink before she said a word. "We've received a report regarding inappropriate conduct." She began motioning for me to take a seat. Inappropriate conduct. I echoed, my brow raised. From me, she slid a piece of paper across the desk. A formal write-up. According to Scott Tremblay, I'd been disruptive to workflow, disrespectful in tone, and a contributor to low morale across the department. It was retaliation. Pure and simple. But I kept my face calm. Because if Scott wanted to play this game on paper, I'd already started my own stack. I almost laughed. Disruptive. For sitting quietly when I wasn't on the clock. Disrespectful for quoting his own policy, word for word, damaging morale. If anything, morale had gone up. People were standing a little taller, breathing a little easier. Because for the first time in a long time, we felt like we could push back. But this wasn't just a warning. This was calculated. "This feels retaliatory," I said quietly. Meeting Carla's eyes, especially since I spoke with you just last week about his behavior. Carla nodded slowly. "You're not the only one who's come forward, Valerie. But now that it's documented, I'm required to log it. I can't remove it unless there's a formal investigation." I swallowed hard. This wasn't a wrist slap. It was a setup, a chess move. Scott Tremblay wasn't trying to correct my behavior. He was building a file. A paper trail to justify what he'd wanted to do since the moment I stopped being silent. Fire me. It was too familiar, too petty, too expected. I thanked Carla and walked back to the floor with my chin up. But inside I was burning. Not just from this week. From years of swallowing things, whole comment slights, skipped raises, unpaid overtime. Always the reliable one, the steady hand. Meanwhile, I watched men with half the qualifications stumble their way up the ladder. That night, I pulled out my personal laptop and started building my own file. Not a complaint, a timeline. I gathered screenshots of every threatening email, every shift policy change, every Slack message where Scott weaponized his authority, the new attendance memos, the productivity audit summaries, names, dates, patterns. By Sunday evening, I had a 10-page document neatly indexed, complete with supporting screenshots, and a growing list of coworkers who had either been written up, intimidated, or pulled into private meetings for mysterious reviews. Some offered to speak with HR directly. Others said they'd submit written statements. A few were afraid, but even they thanked me for saying what they couldn't. Monday morning, I dropped the envelope on Carla's desk. No scene, no drama. Just the truth. "I believe this qualifies as a formal complaint," I said, steady as ever. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded. "Thank you, Valerie," she said. "We've been receiving reports. But yours might be the most complete." And just like that, something shifted. That afternoon, the energy on the floor changed. Not a word was said, but people noticed the tension in the air ease, like the building itself knew something had cracked open. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like we had momentum. Not chaos, not revenge, just truth, finally given weight. Scott was nowhere to be found. His office door stayed shut all morning. His name was mysteriously absent from the 2:00 p.m. operations huddle schedule, a first in months. By 4:20, someone whispered that regional leadership had called him into a closed-door meeting upstairs. When I headed out to the lot, Deshaun caught up with me by the trucks. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked with a smirk. I shrugged. "All I did was tell the truth." He nodded, eyes sharp with meaning. Sometimes that's more dangerous than any lie. That night I slept. Not because it was over, but because something had finally begun. Scott made his move, and I returned it. Clean, documented, undeniable. And now, it wasn't just about me. The company had to answer a question. Would it stand with control or with its people? By Tuesday, the silence surrounding Scott's office spoke louder than any company-wide memo ever could. His SUV was in the lot, but no one had seen him on the floor. No walkthroughs, no check-ins, just absence. Not the kind of absence that felt like a vacation, but the kind that comes before thunder. Rumors spread fast. Some said he'd been suspended pending investigation. Others whispered that HR had brought in a compliance officer from the regional office. One thing was undeniable. They weren't brushing this under the rug anymore. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I'd seen it before managers, shuffled to new departments, reputations quietly repaired with vague restructuring explanations. But this time felt different, sharper, more deliberate. And then the interviews started. HR began scheduling quiet one-on-one meetings with employees across every shift. Deshaun went first, then Rosa, then Malik from receiving. One after another, the same workers who had once sat quietly now brought carefully gathered documentation. Printouts, notes, dates, receipts. There were no protest signs, no angry chants, just cold, clear truth finally allowed in the room. When they called me in, I was ready. Carla greeted me with a steady nod, but she wasn't alone. A second woman joined her mid-40s composed navy pantsuit notepad already open. "Valerie, thank you for coming," Carla said. "This is Dana Kim from Regional Compliance." Dana didn't offer small talk. She dove in. Her questions were surgical measured, direct, and impossible to misread. Did I feel targeted after reporting my concerns? Yes. Did Scott's written warning align with my job performance and behavior? I handed over documentation, screenshots, dates, emails. Dana wrote everything down. She barely blinked. And I knew then, they weren't just listening anymore. They were building something too. Did you ever feel you were targeted for retaliation after raising concerns about company policy? Dana Kim asked. Yes, I answered without hesitation. Were you ever formally reprimanded without proper review or process? I handed her the write-up Scott had issued. This was given to me the day after I waited out the 15-minute doc he enforced. No one asked questions. No one followed up. It was never investigated. Dana took her time reading it. She made a quiet note in her folder. The entire meeting felt less like an interrogation and more like assembling a case that had already been halfway built. She didn't interrupt. She didn't question my credibility. She listened like she already knew. By the time I walked out of that conference room, I wasn't triumphant. I was exhausted. Vindicated, yes, but tired in that deep cellular way you feel when you've held your breath for weeks. Too many women I've known have carried stories like this. Quiet wars, fought behind closed doors, buried under corporate speak and professionalism, where speaking up doesn't just cost peace, it risks your livelihood. I had braced myself for that too. But this time felt different. This time, maybe someone was actually going to be held accountable. 2 days passed. Then on Friday morning, the email came in. Plain, direct, company, letterhead. Effective immediately. Scott Tremblay is no longer employed with the company. Leadership is conducting a comprehensive review of shift-level management practices. Employees are encouraged to contact HR or regional compliance with any ongoing concerns. We appreciate your commitment to a respectful and safe workplace. I stared at the screen not in shock, but in relief. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. No dramatic exit. No HR confrontation in front of the crew. Just a quiet removal. Accountability delivered without noise. Later that morning, Deshaun passed by my station and gave me a look. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Just processing." He smiled, tapping the workbench. "We got him." I shook my head. "No. We stood up for ourselves." "That's the win." And I meant it. Scott wasn't the real story. He was just one chapter. There were still broken systems. Still inequity to challenge. Still bias to unlearn. But we'd made a start. His departure didn't come with confetti or celebration. Just a shift in the air. A new kind of quiet, the kind that didn't shrink you, but made room for you. In the weeks that followed, people started walking lighter, laughing louder, and maybe breathing easier. For the first time in a long while, we weren't surviving. We were reclaiming. Still, for me, this wasn't about returning to normal. Because normal was the very thing that let men like Scott Tremblay operate unchecked. Normal let fear pass for leadership. Normal let silence settle like dust. What mattered most wasn't that he was gone. It was that we were finally seen. One afternoon, after a follow-up safety committee meeting, Carla pulled me aside near the break room. "Just so you know," she said, lowering her voice with a small smile, "your complaint helped trigger a full internal review across multiple departments." I blinked. Wait, this wasn't just about our facility. She nodded. "Turns out, Scott left a pattern. You just happened to be the one who stopped it before it spread further." That landed harder than I expected. I hadn't set out to expose anything. I didn't want credit or headlines. I just didn't want to be invisible anymore. But maybe that's exactly how change begins. Not with noise, not with fanfare, but with refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to be docked, dismissed, or dehumanized. I don't know what comes next. I'm still here, still clocking in before the sun's still tightening bolts and checking systems. But now, I do it with something I hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. The kind of quiet dignity that comes from knowing where you stand and refusing to be pushed back. And when I see others walking in taller, speaking up faster, questioning things they used to swallow whole, I know the truth that 15-minute sit-down wasn't defiance. It was a beginning. Because sometimes, change doesn't start with a megaphone. It starts with stillness. A decision made in silence that echoes across an entire room. What I did that morning wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, controlled, and it reminded every single person watching that dignity isn't something you get for following rules. It's something you protect when the rules are used to erase you. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. But this wasn't just my story. It was the story of anyone who's ever shown up early, stayed late, kept their head down, and still got overlooked, underestimated, or punished for simply doing the right thing. If any part of what I went through felt familiar, I hope you'll drop a comment, not just to support me, but to remind others that they're not alone. Because here's what I've learned. You don't need to flip a table to make a statement. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is sit still, to refuse, to hold your ground quietly and make them feel the weight of your worth. That 15-minute sit-down wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something I didn't even realize I had given away: my voice. So tell me, have you ever been in a position like mine? Have you ever been punished for something petty? Written up for defending yourself? Watched a weaker man fail upward while you were told to be more flexible? Comment below. Let's talk about it. Not just for the sake of the story, but because somebody out there might need to hear yours. And if you found strength in what happened here, I hope you carry it with you. In your next meeting, in your next negotiation, In the moment, you're told to sit down when you deserve to stand up. Support each other. Speak with intention. And if no one's told you lately, you deserve respect without exception. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Because this isn't the last time someone's silence becomes a spark. Let's keep that fire going together.